So hello, my name is Andrés. I'm from Chile originally. I have lived in the UK for the last 10 years and I've been meditating since the 18th of May of 2020, and I am a neuroscientist from the University of Cambridge. So I started TM mainly because of David Lynch. I'm a huge fan, and I'm also, as a neuroscientist, I came across one talk that he gave at Stanford University. I don't remember the year, but during the pandemic I was like rewatching all the films and all the interviews, and then I said, he's the guy who was doing this type of meditation. So the reason why I started was basically because of a description that he made that was to me a bit striking, and it was really hard to believe in the beginning. And it was the description that you could actually have a state of mind where there is no much content and there is a lot of alertness. And to me that was a bit of a paradoxical state, because in neuroscience we have this idea that the more alert you are, the more stuff you have in your mind. It should go like hand in hand. But this state that he described, it was like kind of empty of thought, but it was at the same time very, very like full of alertness, was something that I was curious. And the thing that he was always describing about this sense of peace, like deep sense of like being settled, being at peace. So I wanted to try it, and that's how I learned during 2020 with my teacher, Jonathan Hend in Cambridge. And I thought in the very first week that these experiences that I was having, I remember very vividly that the first meditation that I had were very profound. So I had this experience of like being in an elevator and someone cut the cable, and I was like falling into this very, very peaceful state. I thought in the very beginning that they were like just suggestion, because I was of course reading about this and talking about this and thinking about this most of the time. But over time these experiences were kind of permanent or very frequent. So I was having them like almost every session for a few weeks. So at some point I decided that it wasn't my own I wasn't just self-inducing the state myself, but it was something very real. So the main reason wasn't getting more, it wasn't like about fixing my stress or my levels of attention or becoming more creative. The reason was that I really wanted to experience that state that David described, and I think it happened. If I can think of a benefit that is immediate, that it happened immediately after, I would say, the first 2 weeks, was this clarity that you have after meditating. Like I describe it as like seeing, hearing, smelling in 4K. So you feel like perception as it was during the day, it tends to become much more clear. And it's something that is very important when you do the kind of things that I do, it's a very like, creative work. There's a lot of challenges all the time. So to have these moments during the day that you can just do the meditation and immediately afterwards you feel like refreshed, it was a thing that I wasn't experienced before. Not even when, you can have a nap, but a nap is not enough. So this is like it clears your mind. So basically afterwards you just experience everything like in 4K. That's one thing, that it was immediate and it wasn't planned, it just happened. And the other big thing to me particularly is that in 35 years of my life I had no idea, and I've never ever experienced consciousness. And I'm gonna sound a bit maybe tricky here for my colleagues, but when I'm saying consciousness, I'm saying this state of mind where there is no worries, there is no more content. I remember one meditation that was very clear to me, that I was just very, very deep, and I was thinking, okay, a meteor could strike the earth now and I would be in absolute peace with everything else around me. And that feeling maybe doesn't have a utility, who knows, but it's something that if you realize that you are that, or at some point you you have that, you can have access to that. It's a treasure that's gonna be with you forever, right? So maybe it's not a benefit like, okay, I'm gonna get better at doing math, but you get better at knowing who you are. And I think that's something that as a human race we're kind of neglecting lately. So I have a very good friend in Cambridge called Henry Tozer, and he taught me mindfulness, I think in 2014, 2015, I don't remember anymore. So I was attending to his talks and I was attending to his sessions, and there was something like personally complicated to me that was trying to focus on my breath, that I wasn't very engaged. I could do it, I was relaxing, but focusing on my breath was something that it wasn't very natural to me. So I was, okay, this is nice, maybe I should try something else. So then when I actually learned TM, and I had these very deep experiences that I was talking before, it was to me personally, it was like a huge contrast between like applying like a lot of effort into something versus this effortless practice that you just need to trying to like get rid of things, to let go things instead of just focusing your awareness into something. And something very interesting happened last year when I talked to him again, because I interviewed him I have a YouTube channel, so we were chatting like for an hour, and then we had like 10 minutes of mindfulness, the first 10 minutes of the interview. And I remember that I think due to TM, I was capable of actually doing mindfulness correctly. And I was like, okay, this is how it should be. So concentration is not something that comes to me very naturally when it comes to like focusing on like anchors or breathing or stuff like that. And now I don't need mindfulness. I do my TM every day and that's enough. What else? So from a brain perspective, they are very different apparently. I say apparently because the amount of research that these two techniques have, it's huge. But I would say there are a lot of concerns on whether the experimental designs or how do you test these two different techniques are actually valid or not. So what we're trying to do now, if I can speak a bit about this, is trying to like run a study on TM that takes that into account. So we have a big sample of participants, and we try to replicate some of the findings that people have done, like Dr. Fred Travis before in the past, but also try to bring all the new tools that we have in neuroscience to study the brain to the technique, just to have like a much more like comprehensive way of understanding the practice in terms of the brain activity, with tools that are more like 21st. From my own experience, when I was like transcending, I noticed that this state of restful alertness is a very peculiar state, because you have, if I can draw a 2D axis on the screen, this is the axis of alertness, so basically how alert you are, and this is the axis of content, so how much stuff you have in your mind. Usually in a normal day, if you are alert, you also have a lot of stuff in your mind, so the two things go together. But in TM, there is this paradoxical effect that you are hyper alert or super alert with little in mind. And in neuroscience of consciousness, we have very good tools for characterizing in the brain these different states. And one of the dogmas at the moment in neuroscience, if I can call it a dogma, is that the two things, the two dimensions, should go along, right? If you are more awake, you should have more stuff in your mind. So the motivation for this particular study was, okay, but what happens with the brain, or with these metrics that are new and that people think that they go along between the two axes, when you have this kind of paradoxical state where there is full alertness and zero content. So we decided to run a study to test one of the most well-researched metrics in neuroscience at the moment, And this is the idea of measuring how complex the brain is in terms of the brain activity. So what we want to know is whether complexity in the brain, so basically how much information the brain can process, decreases or increases when you're in this transcending state. And our hypothesis is that it should decrease. So basically, even though you're more and more alert, you are alert, the content of your mind becomes the alertness itself, right? So basically the amount of stuff in your mind decreases. And that should go along with a decrease in this measure of complexity. Why is that important? Well, it is important because we can understand now the brain not just as a machine that generates waves, but also as an information processing tool. So we can understand how much information the brain is processing during the state. That's one thing. And the second thing that to me is very important is that it also fits nicely with the idea that during TM, the borders of perception tend to disappear. So basically your experience tend to become less differentiated. Perception becomes less sharp. And what this metric in the brain predicts is that the less differentiated your experience become, the lower the complexity in the brain should be. So basically a decrease in complexity in the brain should signify some kind of like baseline state where there is no much perception, but there is a lot of alertness. So that's what we're trying to test with this sample of hopefully 45 participants that we're either bringing to the lab or we are traveling somewhere like here, we're in Glasgow, and we're testing around 20 participants over a weekend. We bring the participants here, they meditate, and then we record the brain activity while they do that against a baseline condition. And so that's the premise for the study, and I think that's the motivation. So what happens with brain complexity when you're in a state of in a meditative state? The preliminary results so far, even though we haven't got into the main question, is that we have been capable of replicating previous findings, in particular the increase in alpha activity in the brain, these waves that are like wiggling around 10 times per second. So your brain can actually generate a lot of different waves, but this particular wave that wiggles 10 times per second is something that has been like characterized during the state of meditation for very long. And we were capable of replicating that so far, and that gave me a lot of tranquility. Like, okay, cool, we can do that, and now we can move on with the actual new question. And I think the implications for the study in the future are at least two. One is that we can have independent research in the UK about TM. Usually most of the research comes from the US, and it has been great. It has been there for like 40 years now. But I think there are a lot of developments in neuroscience that we have now new tools to study the brain that haven't been used in TM at all. Like, there are new ways of conceptualizing how the brain, for instance, processes information, how the brain integrates information. And all of these processes are relevant for all kinds of cognitive functions that you can think of, like attention, sleep, creativity, etc. And all of these new ways of looking at the brain haven't been investigated in the context of TM at all. And the reason is mainly because most of the bulk of the research on TM was done during the 90s and before that, for instance, by Dr. Fred Travis, which he's amazing. But there is like a new wave of people that are interested in this, and also new tools that you can use to study the state. So I think that's the second big thing, that we can start now thinking of TM in a way that we couldn't before, because we didn't have the tools to do so. So one specific example, for instance, we know now that the brain communicates information not necessarily in these wiggles, but also in activity that doesn't have any rhythm, which is a bit counterintuitive, but it's a fact that has been replicated over and over again. So we want to know how much of this arrhythmic activity, that this activity that doesn't have any particular order, is also capable of telling us whether a participant is in the meditative state or in another state. We don't know that. So what we want to do is to end up with a list of brain signatures or brain markers that are the most useful one for explaining the TM, the meditation state. So people in the future, if they want to run a study, for instance, if they want to study Alzheimer's or the effects of TM on creativity, now they would have a list of the markers that they should look for, because we're going to kind of increase the list, hopefully, of the features that you can have or the features that you can use to characterize that state. So we're trying to expand the alphabet of the understanding of TM in terms of brain activity.